Hello and welcome to Find Your Voice, where we interview thought leaders from our community at Podcast Guesting Pro. I'm Cassie Welford, and today I'm joined by Jim Allenby. Jim is a high-performance coach who helps elite athletes and senior executives turn preparation and review into measurable performance gains. With 20 years in cricket as a professional player and coach, Jim now translates the system used in elite sport into practical tools for business leaders. His core belief is simple: high performance is not just talent. It's a repeatable process. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Really looking forward to getting to know more about you and your expertise and your business. And I would love to start by asking, what specific moment or experience in your playing career made you think about applying sports methods to business performance?
I think it was not necessarily one really light bulb moment where it all sort of came together, but it was probably a culmination of the last 3 or 4 years of my career. I started probably noticing as much on the off-field stuff as on-field, always asking questions of the CEO and the commercial people and always the coaches as well, why are we doing this? Why are we doing that? So that curiosity in the business side of things and not just playing the game was born from quite a young age. So I think it became obvious to me that I love playing cricket and I had the time of my life, but there was always something more in the background there. And I was always keen, as I say, that the curiosity was always there and just, I guess, constantly questioning what everyone was doing, not because I disagreed with it, but more just because I was just really interested to find out. So I think I realized pretty early on that sport wasn't going to be the only thing I did, but it was always going to be, pivotal in my beliefs and my upbringing. So yeah, I guess a bit of a pest at times, always questioning and always asking, but also, only from a position of wanting to know because I wanted to be able to do things better.
I don't think that's a pest at all. I think curious questions are fantastic, and it's clearly served you very well as a professional player and now in what you're doing with your business, which leads me nicely on to the next question. How do you adapt a preparation and review cycle that you use with Australian cricketers for a CEO or a director?
I think the most obvious way in which you need to alter it from a sports person to a CEO or a board is, as a sportsman or a sports person, we always focus on our own performance and our own results. And that's fine. And that's the way it's supposed to be because it's a very individual pursuit, playing sport. Once you get to the CEOs, board members, managing directors, they're not only responsible for their own performance, but also for many others. So I think the core beliefs are still there, excellence, preparation, review. It's all a similar, I guess, framework or strategy. But when you're looking after 10 people, 20 people, 100, 1,000, it soon becomes a case that not only is your own performance under scrutiny or certainly something you need to keep an eye on, but we're always looking at what everyone else is up to. So, as a player, you have a very self-indulgent life, and I do miss it. But it was very much around, if you perform that day, you do your job well, help the team win, great. But it was a case where you're not really too worried about too many other people outside of your immediate teammates on that day. And I think that's what really drove me into coaching to start with. And then this business is, I was always so keen to understand, not just what other members of my team were up to, but the whole organization. So, that grounding and that experience of playing and having, as I say, that very self-indulgent life where you only have to worry about what you're doing that day and you've got teams of people around you helping you out, which no doubt I took for granted, to a point where, you're helping those who are managing lots of people, lots of emotions, people's careers. There's a lot to think about whilst also thinking about your own sort of state of mind and your own, impact. So that have to help or getting to help other people is really something that's quite unique to the CEOs of the world. And they're people too. They have hugely highly stressed jobs, great jobs, I must say, but, there's a lot of people that they're looking after. So, the frameworks that are set up, with individual players has been great and really successful, and expanding that into groups and leaders has been something I'm extremely passionate about continuing to improve on.
Thank you. And your niche is making people who are already good better. How does that change your intake process and your coaching design?
I know when you say it like that, it sounds like I only work with people who are already good and I want to take the credit. But no, it's a...
Feel free to rephrase slightly.
No, it's true. And I guess early on in my coaching career, I got some pretty direct feedback that I worked better with good players than I did with, I guess, mediocre players or in the middle players. And I think my weakness at the time, but what I understand is a strength, is I just expected everyone was trying to be as good as they possibly could be and were willing to do whatever it took. And what I probably didn't understand or didn't have as much empathy for as I should have was some people just want to be okay or just want to get a little bit better or just fit in. And the way to achieve extremely high performance or international standards or whatever it is that, the person I'm working with is trying to do. It just so happened that those that are willing to do pretty much anything to get better and to achieve what they wanted to, I guess, resonated with the way I coached. It was a very direct method of coaching and direct feedback. At times, maybe too direct. At times, risked offending people, maybe. But I think that those, ultra high performers or those that were already performing well and needed that boost from someone who was, a bit more honest or a bit more direct with them, just so happened to be the correct approach for those, but not for everyone. And one thing I do know is the coaching space, executive, performance coaching, high performance coaching, there's plenty of people doing it and there's some wonderful examples out there. But I'm probably someone who's more suited to doing less work with, I guess, higher end people rather than having a more broad approach with many. So that was probably something I identified relatively early in my coaching career. But something I'm obviously still working on every day is getting more empathetic, but certainly don't want to lose.
Absolutely. And I like that brutal honesty. Like maybe people have never actually had the courage to be brutally honest with people in that high level position. So I feel like they would really respect that coming from somebody like yourself. It's something that people respect, not seen as in any other way than to help them just to progress and move forward.
Yeah, I think so. I think one thing I also know for sure is it's not for everyone. And something when I do start with a new, whether it's a cricket player or a CEO or an executive, sometimes you have to have a moment where you are quite brutal quite early to see if it's going to work. And I think that's something certainly as a sports coach, you become quite clear who will and won't work well with you or work well together. And I think that brutal honesty is something that, it's more of a sign of respect than any. I think, that the learning from me was a lot of high performing people don't get told, quite as directly as they should because people risk offending them or risk not getting to work with them in the future because they're not telling them what they want to hear. And I think to your previous point around, making good people better, I think that's something that, the really high-end people, they know they've got a bit left in the tank to get better, but sometimes they need a bit of a push from someone who makes them slightly uncomfortable or is willing to risk offending them slightly to see how they'd react. And so far, so good. I've had, more than one person say, look, this isn't for me, and that's fine, and vice versa. So I think as long as everyone's honest with each other, then that's a healthy sign of respect.
Yeah, absolutely. And the right people will react in the right way.
For sure. And great point. There's no right or wrong way. It's the right way for you on that day. And it isn't for everyone. And I think that's something, certainly as I've got a little bit older and continue to get older by the day, I certainly understand that, this approach isn't for everyone. There is many ways to achieve the same thing. And sometimes I think high performance is confused at times. It isn't for everyone and nor should it be. So that's something as I've got older, I've certainly softened to and become more aware of.
I like that. And nor should it be. Very powerful words. And how did coaching players who play in the IPL influence the structure or intensity of your training and review systems?
Yeah, I think India is such a unique place and the IPL is the biggest cricket tournament in the world. It's the most money, the most viewers, the biggest branding opportunities and just the highest standard of cricket. So I've coached several of the players that have gone over there and done extremely well. Some have gone there and really struggled. And for the life of me, I couldn't understand why to start with. And as someone who toured India as a player before it was India now, it was not as mature a cricketing nation. They're always a good team, but there wasn't the same glitz and glamour and profile around it. But in the last probably, must be 10, 15 years, they've really accelerated to a point where it's more like US based sport with, cameras everywhere and 5 shows a night and the players are genuine superstars in the country. And that whole, atmosphere was something I hadn't experienced in my own playing days or even with the players I've coached, at international level because nowhere else is like it. So my main aim from that was to make sure I understood what they were going through better. So off I went to India during the IPL and experienced what they experienced in a very, very small degree of, every day there's quite literally thousands of people trying to take selfies of them and, not really able to get out of the hotel rooms for 8, 9, 10 weeks on end. And once again, a common theme developed a bit more empathy, where I realized that they were under a huge amount of strain and stress away from the game. And the games themselves are actually the easiest part. So, them developing ways of not getting too up and not getting too down, whilst they're dealing with a lot of stuff off the field. What I found out is those that sort of managed it really well and really enjoyed the games, because they're almost a release from, that environment of being basically, pursued all the time. They really embraced the fact that that was their release from that. And that's pretty much the opposite of the next level down, where you play the game, it's quite stressful, but, having a game of golf the next day is your release. It's, the game itself was the release. So trying to identify tactics and various, I guess, mindset opportunities to improve was a big learning for me, and certainly bringing that into the executive coaching. And it's like a board meeting. It's your board meeting's your performance. You prep all month, and then you have your meeting with your board and answer all the questions. And the best CEOs do wonderful work day to day, but they need to manage up well as across and down. So it's about framing the event and giving it enough, I guess, energy and preparation, whilst also appreciating people are using a huge amount of energy away from what you see on the TV or what you see as a board member or an executive. So yeah, it's just, I guess it's a bit around separation and a bit around making sure you're ready to perform and creating that environment that does get you, as aroused is a weird word, but it's the right word. It gets you up and about ready to perform, but you can't be like that all day, every day. So, managing that energy and correct approaches for that in a hyper sensitive, place like India it took some work, to be honest. And I came back a much more empathetic coach. And I make no apologies for not being empathetic at the start, but it was certainly a learnt skill that really high energy, high, scrutiny environment, just made me realize how much sharper I needed to be, as well as the players themselves.
It's a really fascinating insight into a world that I didn't know that much about. So thank you for sharing that. It's wonderful to hear about like the lived experience that you've got alongside the professional experience that you're now sharing. And what common misconceptions do business audiences have when you're explaining sports performance concepts to them?
I think it's the immediate nature of sport. It's weekly, it's a performance, it's a review, it's a win, it's a loss, and it's all very cyclical. It's it's either weekly or fortnightly or every few days, depending on the sport. But business, it's a grind. It's hard work every day. Building great businesses, it is every day. It's you can't take your foot off the gas or think you've completed something, because that's when it all goes wrong. So I think the constant grind of business is where there's huge opportunities to get better, because you've got that momentum and you've got that, most days are relatively similar and you can kind of build over a longer period of time. Whereas with sport, it is very, it's week to week. You've got to perform that day. If you don't, it's a review, and whose fault was it? Who did well, who did badly, and it's all very public. So I think that the view from business at times is a bit too short term in terms of how it relates between business and sport. Whereas I think with businesses that, obviously succeed, they succeed for a long period of time. Whereas, sport, people are interested in for a day at a time, maybe 2 days. If they're really passionate about their team, like the Australian soccer team winning on the weekend, we'll celebrate that for a few days. But, businesses, there's less ups and downs, or they're less obvious ups and downs, and it's more of a gradual climb. So not all of the tactics work in terms of what you see on the TV, but what you see from a sporting player, and particularly my experience in cricket, is, they've spent 20 years to get to that point and perform that day. And I think it's not often appreciated or understood just how much work they've done for no reward through that period. And that's what we do in business, isn't it? We work every day. We don't see the reward every day, and we hope or expect at the end of a period of time it succeeds. These people who play sport, it's the same. They've spent, 10, 15, 20 years building up to that moment to win that World Cup or the Olympics or get a great score in cricket or whatever it is. So they've worked a bit longer than people sometimes think. So I guess is the long answer to a very good question.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. We love a long answer, and it's all that invisible blood, sweat and tears that's gone on behind the scenes that I'm sure you're very well aware of. And would you like to share a positive client testimonial? Like, you don't have to name any names, but could you share with us an example of someone that you've worked with and then the transformation that they've gone through?
Yeah, I'm extremely proud of many of the people I've worked with and have spoke to them before coming on here and made sure if I was to reference it, it would be okay. I think the things I'm most proud about are often things that no one will see. It's a young player who had no confidence and wanted to, get a little bit better, or it's there's a couple of business leaders I'm working with that were struggling to motivate their teams and had some great results, usually by working on themselves, which reflected, into their performance with their teams. But probably the most obvious example and the one I guess those in cricket will know the most about is a young player I was working with since he was probably 7 or 8 years old. So this is now more than 20 years ago. So I was a current cricketer, but doing some coaching on the side, and worked with him through, various ups and downs and various things. Because, when you're a teenager, you're not that rational. It turns out that when you're in your 40s, you're not either. But it's, he worked very hard and got a lot of setbacks in his career, wasn't always the first picked, had a lot of reasons to give up on trying to be a cricketer and complete university or do something else. And he kept sticking in, had to travel the world to get an opportunity, ended up playing for Malaysia, even though he's Australian because of a, passport and being born there. Turns out, long story short is he probably had, I'd say 20, 30, 40 opportunities to give up, which most people would have, because a lot of constant setbacks, but it made him just a better player and a more robust person. And he's got to a point now where he plays cricket for Australia and plays in the IPL and is just about the best player in the world in what he does. And he's going to be very, very hard for anyone to convince him to give up being the best in the world because of the amount of work he's had to put in to get there. He continues to, I guess, show the way and show the standards expected of someone who wants to be the best in the world every day, not just on the good days. And that's, that's a wonderful thing that I'm extremely proud of. And there's a few people in similar situations, but very few have dealt with the adversity he has. And, when we catch up, which we do regularly in Perth, whether it's for golf or to talk absolute rubbish over a coffee or something like that, it makes me very proud that we're friends. And also I still coach him now. So they're, very obvious public examples at times, but it's the opportunities you get to make people better at making people better that certainly I love the most. And to the point around CEOs and MDs and directors, they have such a profound impact on people's lives outside of just watching them for 2 hours on a screen that I just think it's so wonderful to be able to help them make other people better as well as themselves. So no permission from any of the executives I work with to talk in much more detail at this stage, but they've got so much left in the tank and they just do so much good that they don't always tell people about. I just trying to encourage everyone just to show how good a job they're doing sometimes.
Love that. Thank you for sharing those examples. And I loved what you said. It's almost like a ripple that's going out. Like it's not just that one person that they're having an impact on. It's like so many lives. And I feel that recognition of that is imperative. And I completely understand why you're proud. So thank you for sharing that. And I'd love to touch on your own podcast journey and ask what has inspired you to use podcasts as a way of growing your business and also sharing your message.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the podcasts are just, they appear like the best way to talk to more people, really. And I think it's obvious that seems to be how people like to consume their information. That's certainly how I like to listen to people I'm interested in, whether it's at the gym or in the car. So I just think it became obvious that maybe the written media isn't as easy a way of spreading the message as widely. And, as I've said a couple of times, I'm extremely passionate about as many people knowing about high performance as possible. And I think the opportunity to be on a podcast means I can speak obviously with yourself, which is great. And I guess interested people will want to talk to me about this topic, and those that aren't interested won't, and nor should they. So I think just being able to go to an existing audience that I guess want to know more about what I know about is really just seemed a sensible way of getting a message out that I feel is really important. And I feel like not enough people talk about the real high performance and the various, there's some amazing bits to it, but there's some downsides as well that I think need to be shared and we need to be open to discuss. Obviously the great days are wonderful, but in between those great days, there's a lot that aren't quite there. And I just think it's really important we don't, not over glamorize, but I think it's important people know the reality of really getting to that high performance state. And that's something I feel like I've got a good opportunity to share personal experiences and those that I work with. And it seemed like the best way to get to the most people was through podcasting. And, everyone likes talking about themselves. So it's a chance to chat about what I've experienced and huge amount of lessons, huge amount of mistakes, but some great stuff in there as well. So obviously you guys have made it extremely easy to get to this point too, which I appreciate, and yeah, more for it.
Thank you. And like you say, those valuable, enriched conversations rather than quick snapshots, like you get to have those valuable conversations with a trusted audience. And we're really looking forward to continuing working with you. How can our listeners connect with you if they would like to do so?
I guess at the moment, what I've spent quite a bit of time the last few months on is building up a library of newsletters and information I'll be putting out on LinkedIn. So just Jim Allenby on LinkedIn, please reach out and I'll certainly accept the request. Otherwise, playerschoice.com.au. Funny story, was my coaching website when I was coaching just cricket and a lot of kids, but subsequently that's where the high performance coaching information lives. Those same newsletters will be posted on there. So yeah, please have a visit, playerschoice.com.au.
And we will add your links below this episode. So that just leaves us to say thank you so much for your time today. Really looking forward to continuing working with you on your thought leadership journey and wishing you all the best for your future success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. And thank you for listening.